A mother knows her child's cry. Like a fingerprint on her soul, it's a sound that can't be forgotten or forged. In a drug-hazed delivery room at Westbridge Memorial, Nia Carter heard that cry. Strong, alive, perfect. But when she woke, they handed her a lifeless bundle and called her grief madness. What they didn't understand was this. You can forge death certificates, falsify records, and bury truth under mountains of lies. But you can't fake a heart-shaped birthmark on a senator's newly adopted baby, the same mark Nia had traced in her ultrasound just weeks before. They thought they could break a mother by stealing her child. Instead, they taught her how far a mother will go to bring her baby home. Sometimes the most dangerous force isn't power or money. It's a mother's love turned to fury by lies. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Nia Carter stood in her bedroom, carefully folding a soft yellow onesie to pack in her hospital bag. Her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed out the fabric, a mix of excitement and nervousness coursing through her body. At 39 weeks pregnant, she had imagined this moment countless times, but now that it was finally here, it felt surreal. "You okay, beautiful?" David's warm voice came from the doorway. Her husband's presence instantly calmed her racing thoughts. He crossed the room and wrapped his arms around her from behind, his hands resting gently on her swollen belly. "Just making sure we have everything," Nia replied, leaning back against his chest. "I can't believe we're finally going to meet our little one." David kissed the top of her head. "We've got this. You're going to be an amazing mother." Nia smiled, but a slight shadow crossed her face. She'd spent months preparing for this moment, reading every pregnancy book she could find, attending birthing classes, even earning a promotion at her consulting firm to ensure financial stability before the baby arrived. Everything was planned, down to the smallest detail. "I packed your favorite comfort items," David said, pointing to the carefully arranged hospital bag. "The lavender oil you love, those fuzzy socks your sister got you, and that playlist we made for the delivery." "What would I do without you?" Nia turned to face him, her dark eyes meeting his. They had met 5 years ago at a mutual friend's wedding, where David had charmed her with his terrible dancing and genuine kindness. Now here they were, about to start their own family. A sharp kick from the baby made them both laugh. "Someone's eager to join the party," David joked, placing his hand where their child had just moved. Nia was about to respond when another kick came, stronger this time. She winced, feeling a familiar tightening sensation across her abdomen. This contraction felt different from the Braxton Hicks she'd been experiencing. More intense, more real. "David," she breathed, gripping his arm. "I think it's time." The next few minutes passed in a blur of activity. David grabbed their packed bags while Nia changed into comfortable clothes, pausing occasionally to breathe through the increasingly frequent contractions. They had rehearsed this moment, but the reality was far more intense than any practice. "Run." As they drove through the darkening evening toward Westbridge Memorial Hospital, Nia tried to focus on her breathing exercises, but an inexplicable sense of unease began to creep into her thoughts. The sunset cast long shadows across the road, and the familiar streets of their neighborhood somehow seemed different, more ominous. "You're awfully quiet," David said, glancing at her with concern. "Are you in pain?" Nia shook her head. "It's not that, I just have this weird feeling." She trailed off, unable to articulate the growing sense of dread in her chest. "Hey," David reached over to squeeze her hand. "Everything's going to be perfect. Westbridge is the best hospital in the area, and Dr. Thompson said your pregnancy has been textbook perfect." Nia nodded, trying to shake off her anxiety. She was being silly. Hormones and nerves, that's all it was. Still, as they pulled into the hospital parking lot, the imposing building seemed to loom over them, its windows dark despite the early evening hour. The automatic doors slid open with a soft hiss as they entered the maternity ward. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow across the sterile walls. A group of nurses at the reception desk looked up as they approached, their expressions oddly blank. "Hi, I'm Nia Carter," she said, breathing through another contraction. I called ahead. I'm in labor. The nurses exchanged glances before one of them, an older woman with steel-gray hair, began typing into the computer. Her name tag read, Nurse Holloway. Yes, Mrs. Carter, Nurse Holloway said, her voice mechanical. We'll need you to fill out these forms. She slid a stack of paperwork across the counter, not meeting Nia's eyes. As Nia began filling out the forms, she noticed the nurses, speaking in hushed tones, throwing furtive glances in her direction. Their whispers seemed to echo in the quiet reception area, just soft enough that she couldn't make out the words. Is everything okay? David asked, noticing their strange behavior. Of course, Nurse Holloway replied smoothly, though her smile didn't reach her eyes. We're just preparing your wife's room. A younger nurse, her name tag reading Elena, approached with a wheelchair. Unlike the others, her expression held genuine warmth. Let's get you settled, Mrs. Carter. How far apart are your contractions? About 6 minutes, Nia answered, easing herself into the wheelchair. The contractions were getting stronger, making it harder to focus on the growing sense that something wasn't right. As Elena wheeled her toward the delivery ward, Nia heard more whispers behind them. She caught fragments of conversation. Special. Croissant in Protocol 7, before they turned a corner. The delivery room was dimly lit, the medical equipment casting strange shadows on the walls. A doctor Nia didn't recognize entered, his face obscured by a surgical mask. Mrs. Carter, I'm Dr. Williams. I'm covering for Dr. Thompson tonight. His voice was clipped, professional. Given your condition, we recommend administering a sedative to ease the delivery process. Nia frowned. What condition? And I specifically requested a natural birth in my birth plan. This is hospital policy, Dr. Williams interrupted, already preparing a syringe. It's for the best. Before Nia could protest further, Nurse Holloway appeared at her side. Your husband will need to wait outside. We're experiencing high patient volume tonight, and our policy— No, David interjected, stepping forward. I'm staying with my wife. Sir, Nurse Holloway's tone grew sharp. If you don't comply, we'll be forced to call security. Nia watched in horror as 2 security guards materialized in the doorway. David looked helplessly between them and Nia, his face contorted with worry. It's okay, Nia said, though everything in her screamed that it wasn't. I'll be fine, just stay close. David squeezed her hand one last time before the guards escorted him out. As the door closed behind him, Nia felt truly alone for the first time since labor began. The next few hours passed in a haze of pain and confusion. The sedative, despite her protests, made the room spin and blur around her. Figures moved in and out of her vision, their whispers forming an endless, incomprehensible stream of sound. Through the fog, Nia tried to focus on what was happening. The contractions came faster, stronger, but the medication made it hard to distinguish one sensation from another. She caught glimpses of medical instruments, heard fragments of hushed conversations, but nothing made sense. Heartbeat is strong. Procedure ready. Make it quick. Time seemed to stretch and compress like a rubber band. Nia fought against the heavy blanket of sedation, trying to stay present in this moment she had dreamed about for so long. But the medication was too strong, pulling her deeper into a twilight state between consciousness and darkness. Then, cutting. Through the fog like a beam of sunlight, she heard it, a cry. Strong, healthy, and undeniably real. Her baby. The sound filled her heart with joy even as her mind struggled against the encroaching darkness. My baby, she tried to say, but the words wouldn't form. Let me see. But consciousness was already slipping away, the room fading to black around her. The last thing she heard was her child's cry, growing fainter as if being carried away down a long corridor. When Nia finally opened her eyes, the delivery room was gone. She found herself in a different space, smaller, colder, with stark white walls that seemed to press in around her. The sedative's effects were wearing off, leaving her with a pounding headache and a mouth that felt stuffed with cotton. David, she called out, her voice rough. No answer. The silence was deafening. Where was the busy bustle of the maternity ward? Where was her husband? Most importantly, where was her baby? The door opened with a soft click, and Nurse Holloway entered. Her face was set in a mask of professional detachment as she carried a small bundle wrapped in a white hospital blanket. "Mrs. Carter," she said, her voice mechanical and cold. "I'm sorry to inform you that your child didn't survive the delivery." Time stopped. The words hung in the air like poison gas, impossible to process or accept. Nurse Holloway placed the bundle in Nia's arms. But something was wrong. Terribly, horrifically wrong. Nia looked down at the small, still form in her arms, and every maternal instinct in her body screamed in protest. The weight was wrong. The shape was wrong. Everything about this baby felt wrong. "This isn't my baby," she whispered, her voice shaking. "I heard my baby cry. I heard—" "The grief process can play tricks on our minds," Nurse Holloway cut her off, already moving toward the door. "I'll send your husband in shortly. Again, I'm very sorry for your loss." The door closed behind her with a final click, leaving Nia alone with the horrible truth growing in her mind. She had heard her baby cry, strong and healthy. She had felt the life they had created moving inside her just hours ago. This lifeless form in her arms was not her child. Looking down at the still bundle, Nia's mind raced with questions. Where was her real baby? What had really happened in that delivery room? And most terrifyingly, who would steal a newborn child, and why? The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting harsh shadows across the room as Nia held the evidence of an unthinkable crime in her trembling arms. In that moment, she made a silent vow. She would find out what happened in this hospital. She would uncover the truth, and she would find her baby no matter what it took. The cold hospital room seemed to close in around Nia as she stared at the still bundle in her arms. Her throat burned with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. Not yet, not until she knew the truth. "Nurse," she called out, her voice stronger than she expected. "I need to see my husband right now." Nurse Holloway's footsteps echoed down the hallway, growing fainter rather than closer. Nia's calls went unanswered as minutes stretched into what felt like hours. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, their steady drone matching the pounding in her head. When the door finally opened, it wasn't Nurse Holloway who entered, but a younger nurse Nia hadn't seen before. The woman avoided eye contact as she checked Nia's vitals, her movements quick and efficient. "Please," Nia said, trying to catch the nurse's eye. "I need to see David. Something isn't right here." The nurse's hands trembled slightly as she recorded Nia's blood pressure. "Mrs. Carter, you need to rest. You've been through a traumatic experience. What I need is to see my husband and get some answers." Nia's voice rose, causing the nurse to flinch. "I heard my baby cry. This isn't—" The door swung open again, and Nurse Holloway strode in, her face set in stern lines. "That's enough, Mrs. Carter. Your husband is being briefed on the situation. We need you to remain calm." "Calm?" Nia let out a bitter laugh. "You expect me to be calm when you're lying to me about my baby?" "Mrs. Carter." Nurse Holloway's voice took on a patronizing tone that made Nia's blood boil. "I understand that grief can manifest in many ways, but these accusations— Don't you dare patronize me!" Nia cut her off, her hands gripping the hospital blanket. "I'm a mother who just gave birth, not a child having a tantrum. I want to see David now." Something flickered across Nurse Holloway's face. Anger? Fear? Before her professional mask slipped back into place. "Very well. I'll send him in." The minutes crawled by after Nurse Holloway left. Nia's mind raced with possibilities, each more terrifying than the last. She kept replaying the delivery in her head, the whispered conversations, the forced sedation, the sound of her baby's cry growing distant. When David finally entered the room, Nia's heart cracked at the sight of him. Her strong, optimistic husband looked broken. His eyes were red-rimmed, his shoulders slumped with the weight of unimaginable grief. "David!" She reached for him, but he moved slowly as if in a daze. "David, listen to me. They're lying to us." He sank into the chair beside her bed, running a hand over his face. "Nia, honey. They showed me the paperwork. I signed the forms for the autopsy and burial arrangements. You what? Nia felt the room spin around her. No, David, you don't understand. I heard our baby cry. This isn't our child. David took her hand, his touch gentle but hesitant. The doctor explained that sometimes the mind plays tricks. Dr. Williams said it's common for mothers who experience loss to... Stop it! Nia pulled her hand away. Are you seriously going to sit there and tell me I'm imagining things? I carried our child for 9 months. I felt every kick, every movement. I know what I heard. Mrs. Carter, Dr. Williams appeared in the doorway, his face grave. I understand this is difficult, but you need to accept the reality of your situation. Grief often plays tricks on the mind, making us hear or see things that aren't real. Nia stared at him, really looking at this man who had appeared out of nowhere to deliver her baby. Where was Dr. Thompson, who had guided her through every step of her pregnancy? Why had everything changed the moment she entered this hospital? I want to see my medical records, she demanded. I want to see the delivery notes. All in good time, Dr. Williams said smoothly. Right now, what you need is rest. Nurse Holloway will bring you something to help you sleep. No more drugs. Nia's voice echoed off the sterile walls. You already sedated me against my wishes during delivery. I won't let you do it again. David stood up, placing himself between Nia and the doctor. Maybe we should wait on the medication. She's been through enough today. Dr. Williams's eyes narrowed slightly before he nodded. Of course. We'll give you some time alone. He turned to leave but paused at the door. Oh, and Mrs. Carter? Try not to upset yourself further. These delusions, they're not healthy for your recovery. After he left, Nia turned to David. You have to believe me. Something is wrong here. Why won't they show us the records? Why did they sedate me when I specifically requested a natural birth? Why? Nia, please, David's voice cracked. I can't do this right now. We lost our baby. We need to grieve, to accept. A soft knock interrupted them. A young man in hospital maintenance coveralls entered, pushing a mop bucket. He kept his head down as he cleaned, but as he passed Nia's bed, his hand moved quickly, dropping something onto her blanket. David didn't notice, lost in his own grief, but Nia's fingers closed around the small piece of paper. The janitor finished his work quickly and left without a word, but Nia caught the fear in his eyes as he glanced back at her. When David walked to the window, his back turned, Nia unfolded the note. Her heart stopped as she read the hastily scrawled words. Your baby is alive, do not trust them. The paper trembled in her hands. She quickly tucked it under her pillow, mind racing. Someone else knew the truth. Someone else had seen what happened. Before she could process this revelation, Nurse Holloway returned with discharge papers. We think it's best if you continue. Your recovery at home, Mrs. Carter. The paperwork is all in order. What? David turned from the window. But she just gave birth. Doesn't she need more time to... Our maternity ward is quite full, Nurse Holloway cut him off. And given Mrs. Carter's emotional state, we believe home recovery would be best. Nia watched the nurse's face carefully. Every instinct told her this woman was lying. But why? What were they trying to hide by rushing her out? As David helped her dress, Nia's mind worked furiously. She needed allies, needed to find someone who could help her uncover the truth. She remembered the young nurse who had shown her kindness during admission. Elena. Maybe she would help. In the bathroom, changing back into her clothes, Nia studied her reflection. The woman who stared back at her looked haunted, but her eyes burned with determination. They had chosen the wrong mother to deceive. As they prepared to leave, Nia grabbed a nurse's arm, not Holloway, but one of the younger ones. Could you give a message to Nurse Elena, the one who admitted me? The nurse's eyes widened slightly. I'm sorry, what was the message? Just tell her Nia Carter needs to speak with her about last night, about what she saw. The nurse nodded quickly and hurried away. Nia watched her go, noting how she immediately turned toward the nurse's station. Good. Let them worry about what Elena might have seen. The drive home was silent, heavy with unspoken words. David kept glancing at her, his face etched with concern. But Nia stared straight ahead. Her mind replayed every detail of the past 24 hours, looking for clues, for answers. Their house felt different when they arrived, empty in a way it hadn't been before. The nursery door stood slightly ajar, yellow walls seeming to mock them with their cheerfulness. David moved to close it, but Nia stopped him. "No," she said firmly. "Leave it open. This isn't over." "Nia." David's voice was gentle but strained. "We need to accept." "Accept what?" she challenged. "Accept that our healthy baby suddenly died? Accept that they rushed me out of the hospital before I could ask questions? Accept that they're treating me like I'm crazy for knowing what I heard?" David sank onto the couch, head in his hands. "What do you want me to think, Nia? That there's some kind of conspiracy? That the entire hospital is lying to us? Why would they do that?" "I don't know," Nia admitted, pacing the living room. "But I'm going to find out. First, I need to talk to Elena. She seemed different from the others. Maybe she'll help us understand what happened." She dialed the hospital's main number, asking for Nurse Elena. The response made her blood run cold. "I'm sorry," the receptionist said. "Nurse Elena was transferred last night. We don't have a forwarding location." Nia's hand tightened on the phone. "Transferred? In the middle of the night? That's all the information I have, ma'am." After hanging up, Nia told David about Elena's sudden transfer. She could see doubt beginning to creep into his eyes, but he still shook his head. Maybe it was just a coincidence, he suggested, but his voice lacked conviction. "David," Nia knelt in front of him, taking his hands in hers. "I know this is hard. I know you want to believe there's a rational explanation. But think about it. Everything about last night was wrong. The way they treated us, the sudden staff changes, the rushed discharge." He squeezed her hands, but didn't respond. After a long moment, he stood up. We should start planning the funeral, for closure." "No." Nia pulled away from him. "I won't plan a funeral for a baby that isn't ours. I won't give them what they want." "What they want?" David's voice rose for the first time. "Who is they, Nia? The doctors? The nurses? The entire hospital staff? Do you hear how this sounds?" But Nia wasn't listening anymore. Her eyes had fallen on the stack of papers they'd brought home from the hospital. On top was the autopsy report for their supposedly deceased child. With trembling hands, she picked it up and began to read. Everything seemed in order until she reached the measurements. The baby's weight was listed as 5 pounds, 3 ounces. "This is it," she whispered. "This is proof." "What are you talking about?" Nia grabbed her pregnancy journal from the coffee table, flipping to her last checkup notes. "Look at this, David. At my appointment last week, Dr. Thompson estimated the baby's weight at nearly 8 pounds. How did our baby lose 3 pounds in a week?" David stared at the conflicting numbers, his face pale. That could be an error in the estimate? Or it could be proof that the baby they showed us wasn't ours. Nia's voice was steel now, her conviction absolute. "Our baby is alive, David. And I'm going to find out what happened to it if I have to tear that hospital apart, brick by brick." She looked up at her husband, seeing the conflict in his eyes. "Are you with me?" David looked between the autopsy report and his wife's determined face. Something shifted in his expression, the first crack in his acceptance of the hospital's story. "What do you need me to do?" The morning sun cast long shadows through the kitchen window as Nia pored over her pregnancy records. She had barely slept, spending the night documenting every detail she could remember from the hospital. Her laptop screen glowed with dozens of open tabs. Research on infant mortality rates, hospital procedures, patient rights. "I found something," David said, walking in with his phone. Dark circles under his eyes matched hers. "Dr. Sarah Reynolds. She's an independent OB/GYN who specializes in high-risk pregnancies and medical oversight. Maybe she can review our records." Nia grabbed her phone immediately. The receptionist at Dr. Reynolds' office was hesitant at first, but something in Nia's voice must have conveyed her desperation. They gave her an emergency consultation slot that afternoon. Dr. Reynolds' office was warm and welcoming, a stark contrast to the sterile horror of Westbridge Memorial. The doctor herself was a tall woman with kind eyes and an air of quiet authority. "Mrs. Carter," she said, reviewing the files spread across her desk. "These weight discrepancies are concerning. Based on your final pregnancy checkup, your baby's estimated weight was significantly higher than what's listed in the hospital report." "Could the original estimate have been that wrong?" David asked, squeezing Nia's hand. Dr. Reynolds shook her head. "Not by this much. Modern ultrasound technology is quite accurate, especially this late in pregnancy. This difference is well outside the normal margin of error." Nia leaned forward. "What are you saying, doctor?" "I'm saying," Dr. Reynolds chose her words carefully, "that these records raise serious questions about what happened during your delivery. Have you tried accessing your complete medical records from Westbridge?" "That's our next stop," Nia replied. "We're heading there after this." Dr. Reynolds' expression darkened. "Be careful. I've heard rumors about Westbridge's maternity ward. Nothing concrete enough to report, but enough to make me suspicious." The drive to Westbridge felt different in daylight. The imposing building no longer seemed to loom quite so menacingly. But Nia's heart still raced as they approached the entrance. They had barely reached the records department when a security guard stepped into their path. "Can I help you folks?" "Yes," David said smoothly. "We're here to get copies of our medical records from 2 days ago. We have ID and—" "I'm sorry," the guard cut him off. "Records department is closed for system maintenance today." Nia noticed a woman walking out with a stack of papers. "It looks open to me." The guard's face hardened. "Like I said, closed for maintenance. You'll need to come back another time." As they turned to leave, Nia caught sight of Nurse Holloway watching from around a corner. Their eyes met briefly before the nurse disappeared down a hallway. "They're hiding something," Nia said as they walked to their car. "Why else would they block us from seeing our own records?" David's phone buzzed. A text from Mark, his co-worker. "Nia, Mark says he needs to talk to us about his nephew who was born here last year." They met Mark at a quiet coffee shop across town. The usually jovial man looked nervous, constantly glancing over his shoulder as he spoke. "My sister's baby," he said in a low voice. "They told her he was stillborn, but she swears she heard him cry. The hospital rushed her out just like they did with you. When she tried to investigate, strange things started happening. Threatening phone calls, cars following her." Nia's hands trembled around her coffee cup. "What happened?" "She gave up," Mark said bitterly. "Moved to another state. But she's never been the same. When I heard your story, it's too similar to be coincidence." That evening, as they processed Mark's story, a news alert popped up on Nia's phone. Her breath caught as she read the headline, "Local mother claims baby stolen. At Westbridge Memorial, hospital denies allegations." The article was about Ashley Thompson, a young black mother who had given birth at Westbridge the previous year. Her story matched Nia's almost exactly. Unexpected sedation, separation from family, a baby declared dead despite being heard crying. "David," Nia called out, "we need to find this woman." But as they dug deeper, they hit another wall. Ashley Thompson had no social media presence, no listed phone number. It was as if she had vanished. "Wait," David said, scrolling through his phone. "There's a journalist mentioned in the article. Terrence Blake. Says he specializes in investigating medical fraud." It took 3 days of persistent calling before Terrence agreed to meet them. He chose a dingy bar on the outskirts of town, arriving late and immediately ordering a whiskey. "Before we start," he said, his voice gravelly, "you need to understand something. What you're stepping into, it's bigger than you know, and more dangerous." "Tell us everything," Nia demanded. Terrence took a long drink. "I've been tracking cases like yours for the past 2 years. Healthy babies disappearing from hospitals, but only from certain mothers, women of color, low-income families, single parents, always with the same pattern. Unexpected complications, rushed paperwork, missing records. How many cases? David asked. That I can confirm? 15 across 3 hospitals? But I suspect there are many more. These people, they're careful. They know how to make grieving mothers look hysterical, how to make their stories seem impossible. Nia's fingers dug into the table. Who are they? That's what I've been trying to figure out. There's a network. Doctors, nurses, social workers. They're connected to private adoption agencies, but I can't prove it yet. Every time I get close. He rolled up his sleeve, revealing a jagged scar. Let's just say they take their privacy seriously. David pulled Nia closer. Why are you helping us if it's so dangerous? Terrence's eyes hardened. Because I'm tired of watching them steal children from mothers who deserve them. And because you're different, you have evidence. That weight discrepancy in the records? That's the kind of mistake that could crack this whole thing open. Over. The next week, Nia and David worked with Terrence, building a case. They discovered more families with similar stories, all connected to Westbridge. Most had given up their fights, worn down by grief and fear. One afternoon, Nia received a call from an unknown number. A woman's voice, trembling with fear, came through the line. I saw your posts online, she said, about your baby at Westbridge. I was a nurse there until last month. I know what they're doing. Nia grabbed a pen. Please tell me everything. They're selling them, the nurse whispered. Healthy babies, stolen from mothers they think won't or can't fight back. There's a whole system. They forge death certificates, create fake adoption papers. The money, it's incredible amounts. That's why they're so careful. Why they... She broke off suddenly. Someone's here. I have to go. Meet me at midnight, the old church on Wilson Street. I'll tell you everything. Nia and David arrived at the church early, parking in the shadows. Minutes ticked by with no sign of the nurse. Then, as the church bells began to toll midnight, they noticed a car parked haphazardly across the street. David approached first, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. The scream that tore from his throat brought Nia running. The nurse sat slumped over her steering wheel, an empty pill bottle in her lap. A note on the passenger seat read, I'm sorry for what I did. I can't live with the guilt. But something was wrong. The handwriting was too neat, too perfect. And there, barely visible on the nurse's neck, faint bruises in the shape of fingers. This wasn't suicide, Nia whispered, backing away from the car. They got to her first. Terrence arrived minutes later, taking control of the situation. Don't touch anything else. I have contacts in the police department, people who might listen, but you two need to get out of here now. As they drove home, Nia's mind raced. The nurse's last words echoed in her head. Incredible amounts of money. Who would pay so much for stolen babies? And why? The answer came the next morning, buried in financial records Terrence had obtained. A pattern of large wire transfers from private adoption agencies to offshore accounts, all coinciding with dates of suspicious deaths at Westbridge. Look at these numbers, Terrence said, spreading documents across their kitchen table. Each transfer is between $300,000 and $500,000. Someone's paying premium prices for these babies. But who's receiving the money? David asked. It's laundered through a dozen different shell companies. But I traced one. Payment back to a private adoption broker named James Sullivan. He specializes in discreet placements for wealthy clients. Nia studied a photo of Sullivan, an unremarkable man in an expensive suit. How do we find him? We don't, Terrence warned. Not yet. He's connected to some very powerful people. We need more evidence first. That night, as David slept, Nia sat in the nursery they had prepared with such hope. The yellow walls seemed to hold their dreams of parenthood, now twisted into a nightmare of corruption and theft. Her phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. Stop digging. Some things are better left buried. She took a screenshot of the threat before deleting it. They were watching her, trying to scare her off, but they didn't understand. There was nothing more dangerous than a mother fighting for her child. The next day, they discovered that Ashley Thompson, the mother from the news article, had died in a car accident 3 months after going public with her story. The police report listed it as a tragic accident, brake failure on a dangerous road. This is how they operate, Terrence explained. They eliminate threats quietly, make deaths look natural or accidental. They have people everywhere, police, hospitals, social services. Then we need to be smarter, Nia said. We need to find someone on the inside who's willing to talk. David nodded. I have an idea. Remember that janitor who slipped you the note? If we can find him. But when they returned to Westbridge under the pretense of collecting belongings, they learned the janitor had quit suddenly, leaving no forwarding address. Another dead end. Another witness silenced. That evening, as they reviewed their evidence, with Terrence, a breaking news alert flashed across the TV. A prominent senator and his wife had just announced the adoption of a newborn through a private agency. Wait, Nia froze, staring at the screen. That baby, the birthmark on its shoulder. The camera zoomed in on the sleeping infant, showing a distinctive heart-shaped mark, identical to the one Nia had seen in her ultrasound photos. That's my baby, she whispered, her voice breaking. That's our child. Terrence was already typing frantically on his laptop. The adoption was handled by Sullivan's agency. The timeline matches perfectly with your delivery date. David gripped the back of a chair, his knuckles white. We have proof now. We can go to the police. No, Terrence cut him off. Not yet. The senator's too powerful, and we don't have enough concrete evidence. We need something irrefutable. Documents, witnesses, DNA proof. Then how do we get it? Nia demanded. I have a contact in the hospital records department, Terrence said. Someone who's been helping me gather evidence. Tomorrow night she's working late. If we can get in, breaking into the hospital? David looked uncertain. That's what we're going to do, Nia interrupted. I don't care what it takes. That's our baby being paraded on national television, and I'm going to prove it. As they planned their infiltration of Westbridge Memorial, none of them noticed the black SUV parked across the street, its tinted windows concealing the figure, watching their house. The figure spoke quietly into a phone. They know about the senator's baby. Yes, I understand. It will be handled. Inside, Nia stood at her window, staring out at the night sky. Somewhere out there, her baby was alive. Being held by strangers who had no idea their joy was built on her pain, but not for long. Tomorrow they would find the truth. Tomorrow they would begin to tear down this wall of silence, and nothing, not threats, not fear, not all the money and power in the world, would stop her from exposing this conspiracy and reclaiming her child. The darkness pressed against the hospital windows as Nia crept through the deserted corridor. Terrence's contact had let them in through a service entrance, but now, surrounded by shadows and silence, every footstep felt like a thunderclap. The records room should be at the end of this hall, Terrence whispered, consulting the building layout on his phone. Sarah's keeping the security cameras on a loop, but we need to hurry. David touched Nia's shoulder. Maybe I should go first. No, Nia cut him off. This is my fight. I need to see these files myself. The records room was smaller than she expected, walls lined with filing cabinets and a single computer terminal glowing in the darkness. Nia's hands shook as she began searching, through the files, looking for any trace of that night. Here, she breathed, pulling out a folder. This is wait, she frowned, flipping through the pages. These aren't the original documents, they've been replaced. Terrence leaned over her shoulder. Look at the timestamps. These were printed 2 days after your delivery. They're covering their tracks. A noise in the hallway made them freeze. Footsteps approached, then passed. Nia released the breath she'd been holding and turned to the computer. If they replace the paper files, maybe there's something in the system, she said, typing rapidly. Her experience in database management at work was finally proving useful. The password screen glowed mockingly until Terrence handed her a sticky note. Try this. My contact said it should work. Numbers and letters appeared as her fingers flew across the keyboard. Windows opened and closed as she dug deeper into the hospital's records. Got it, she whispered triumphantly. Here's my original file, but there's another one. An unregistered birth record under my name. David leaned closer. What does it say? Before Nia could answer, the door swung open. Nurse Holloway stood in the doorway, her face twisted with fury. I knew you'd try something like this, she said, reaching for something in her pocket. You just couldn't leave well enough alone. Nia grabbed the flash drive Terrence had given her, quickly downloading what she could. It's over, Nurse Holloway. We know about the adoption ring. We know about the senator. You know nothing, Holloway sneered, advancing into the room. You're just another unstable mother, unable to accept her loss. That's what everyone will say when they find you here, attempting to alter hospital records in your delusional state. The syringe in her hand caught the light as she stepped forward. Now, why don't we give you something to help you rest? David moved to protect Nia, but Holloway was faster than expected. The needle plunged into Nia's arm before anyone could react. Security will be here soon, Holloway said calmly, as Nia felt the room begin to spin. And they'll find a grieving mother, who finally snapped such a tragedy. Terrence tried to reach the door, but two orderlies appeared, blocking their escape. As consciousness faded, Nia heard Holloway speaking into a phone. Yes, she's been contained. Process her for psychiatric evaluation immediately. The world dissolved into darkness. When Nia's eyes fluttered open, she found herself in a hospital bed, restraints binding her wrists and ankles. Through the fog in her mind, she could hear voices outside her door. Complete psychotic break, a man was saying. Conspiracy theories, paranoid delusions about stolen babies. We'll need to transfer her to the psychiatric ward for long-term observation. No, she tried to say, but her tongue felt too heavy to form words. Through the window in her door, she could see doctors gathering, their faces grave as they discussed her fate. The medication should keep her calm, one said. We'll begin transfer procedures in the morning. As they walked away, Nia fought against the drugs clouding her mind. She had to stay awake, had to find a way out. The restraints bit into her wrists as she twisted, searching for any weakness. Outside the hospital, David paced frantically while Terrence worked his phone. They can't just hold her, David insisted. We have rights. They can if they declare her mentally unstable, Terrence replied grimly, which is exactly what they're doing. But I've got someone coming who might help. Just hold on. Minutes stretched into hours. Dawn was breaking when a sleek black car pulled up. A woman in an expensive suit stepped out, radiating authority. Amanda Walsh, she introduced herself. I'm a civil rights attorney. Mr. Blake called me about your wife's situation. Inside, she unleashed a hurricane of legal threats, demanding to see Nia immediately. The hospital administrators wilted under her assault. My client has committed no crime, she declared. You have no grounds to hold her against her will. Release her now, or I'll have every news outlet in the country on your doorstep by noon. As the doctors huddled in panicked discussion, Terrence slipped away. He returned minutes later, face grim. They're destroying evidence, he whispered to David. I saw them deleting files, shredding documents. Whatever Nia found in that records room, it scared them badly. Finally, the hospital agreed to release Nia. She emerged unsteady but alert, the drugs beginning to wear off. Amanda Walsh helped her into a wheelchair while delivering a final warning to the administrators. If anything happens to my client or her family, I have documents prepared to go to every major news outlet and law enforcement agency in the country. Remember that. In the car, Nia's head gradually cleared. The files, she said suddenly. Before Holloway caught us, I saw something. A transfer order, scheduled for tomorrow night. What kind of transfer? David asked. A baby. They're moving it from a private clinic to... She squeezed her eyes shut, fighting to remember through the lingering fog of sedation. An estate. Outside the city. Terrence's eyes widened. The senator's estate. They're delivering your baby to them tomorrow night. Then that's where we'll be, Nia said firmly. But when they arrived home, they found their house had been ransacked. Drawers emptied, computers smashed. Every scrap of evidence they'd gathered gone. They're getting desperate, Terrence observed, surveying the damage. Which means we're close to something big. David's phone buzzed. A text from an unknown number. His face went pale as he read it. "What is it?" Nia asked. "A warrant for my arrest," he said quietly. "They're claiming I assaulted hospital security during our break-in. There's video footage." "That's impossible," Nia protested. "You never—" "They don't care what really happened," Terrence cut in. "They just need him out of the way. Standard procedure. Divide and conquer." Before they could plan their next move, police sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. "Go," Amanda Walsh ordered, already pulling out her phone. "I'll handle this, but you need to disappear, now." They split up, David with Terrence, Nia with Amanda. As they drove away in opposite directions, Nia watched police cars converge on their home in her rearview mirror. "Where are we going?" she asked Amanda. "Somewhere safe," the lawyer replied. "I have a colleague who specializes in witness protection. You'll stay with her until we can figure out our next move." But something in Amanda's voice made Nia uneasy. She noticed the lawyer checking her mirrors too frequently, taking unnecessary turns. "Stop the car," Nia demanded suddenly. "Mrs. Carter, I understand you're upset, but—" "Stop the car now," Nia's voice rose. "You're not taking me somewhere safe, are you? Who are you really working for?" Amanda's face hardened. "You should have taken the hospital's offer," she said, pressing down on the accelerator. "A few months in a psychiatric ward would have been better than what's coming." Nia grabbed the wheel, forcing the car toward the curb. They struggled briefly before the vehicle jumped the curb, crashing into a newspaper stand. Dazed but conscious, Nia stumbled out of the car. Amanda Walsh lay slumped over the airbag, blood trickling from a cut on her forehead. In her open purse, Nia spotted hospital documents with James Sullivan's name on them. She ran, not knowing where she was going until she found herself at Terrence's office. Inside, she found him and David hunched over a computer. "The lawyer," she gasped. "She's working with them." "We know," Terrence said grimly. "I just found her connection to Sullivan's adoption agency. But that's not the worst part." He turned, the screen toward her. On it was a document detailing the scheduled transfer, her baby's delivery to the senator's family. "They're not just delivering the baby," he explained. "They're cleaning house. Everyone involved, everyone who knows too much. They're planning to eliminate all loose ends tomorrow night." David pulled Nia close. "We have to stop them." "We will," she said, her voice steel. "But first, we need to get our story out. If anything happens to us, the world needs to know the truth." Terrence nodded, already typing. "I have contacts at every major news outlet. We'll release everything we have, the financial records, the pattern of suspicious deaths, the connections to Sullivan and the senator." "They'll try to discredit us," David warned. "Let them try," Nia said. "We have something they don't, the truth." As Terrence prepared their evidence for release, Nia and David planned their next move. The senator's estate was heavily guarded, but they had an advantage, the element of surprise. "If we can get proof," Nia said, studying satellite images of the estate. "Actual photos of our baby there, no one will be able to deny what's happening." But as they finalized their plans, David's phone buzzed again. This time, it was a video, security footage from the hospital showing him attacking a guard. "This is impossible," he whispered. "I never—" "Deep fake," Terrence explained. "Very good one, too. They're laying the groundwork to destroy your credibility." Nia's phone lit up next. Photos of her at various locations around the city, clearly taken without her knowledge. The message attached read, "Back off now, or these show a mentally unstable woman stalking innocent families." They were being boxed, in their every move anticipated and countered, but Nia refused to give up. "Let them come," she said, her voice steady. "Let them try to silence us. We know the truth, and tomorrow night, everyone else will too." As darkness fell, they made their final preparations. Terrence set up dead man switches on his computers. If anything happened to them, everything they'd discovered would automatically release to the media. David cleaned his service weapon from his security job, though they all prayed it wouldn't be needed. Nia stood at the window, watching the city lights flicker in the distance. Somewhere out there, her baby was waiting. Tomorrow, one way or another, this would end. "Whatever happens," she said quietly, "promise me something. Promise me the truth gets out. Promise me they don't get away with this." David and Terrence nodded solemnly. They all knew the risks, knew that people had died for knowing far less than they did now. But they also knew they couldn't back down. Not when they were so close. Not when an innocent child's future hung in the balance. Tomorrow night, they would confront the senator, expose the trafficking ring, and bring down everyone involved in stealing babies from their mothers, or they would die trying. As they settled in for their last night of preparation, none of them saw the figures moving in the darkness outside. Black-clad men taking up positions around the building, weapons ready. The countdown to confrontation had begun. Dawn broke over the city as Nia jolted awake in Terrence's office, her neck stiff from sleeping in a chair. The events of the past day felt like a nightmare, but the bruises on her wrists from the hospital restraints proved otherwise. They had less than 18 hours before her baby would be delivered to the senator's family. A black SUV crawled past the building for the third time that morning. Nia ducked away from the window, her heart pounding. "They're watching every move we make," she whispered to David, who was cleaning his service weapon again, hands steady despite his exhaustion. Terrence burst through the door, face flushed with urgency. "We've got a problem. My contact at the traffic camera office just sent this." He pulled up a video showing identical black SUVs positioned at major intersections throughout the city. "They're creating a net. The moment we move, they'll know." "Then we need to move smart," Nia said, studying the traffic camera feeds. "Look at the pattern. They're focused on main roads, places they expect us to go." David nodded. "Back alleys and service roads might be clear, but we still don't know where exactly they're holding our baby before the transfer." "Actually," Terrence turned to his computer, "I might have something on that. Remember the financial records we found? I traced some unusual payments to a private medical facility on the outskirts of town, Evergreen Wellness Center." Nia leaned forward. "What kind of facility?" "On paper, it's a high-end birthing center, but the power consumption records I pulled show it's using way more energy than it should for the number of patients they claim to have. They've got some kind of underground setup. A holding facility," David realized. "Somewhere to keep the babies until they're transferred to their new families." Nia's hands clenched into fists. "How do we get in?" "We don't," Terrence warned. "Not directly. That place is locked down tight. But," he pulled up another document, "they're hosting a private adoption event this afternoon. Exclusive clients, only." "The perfect cover for trafficking stolen babies," David growled. Nia was already moving. "I need a new identity, something that'll get me in there." Terrence hesitated. "Nia, it's too dangerous. If they recognize you—" "They won't," she cut him off. "You said exclusive clients, right? Rich people looking to adopt? They're expecting to see wealthy white faces. They won't look too closely at the help." An hour later, Nia examined herself in the bathroom mirror. Her hair was pulled back severely and she wore a catering company uniform that Terrence had somehow procured. Most importantly, she wore colored contacts that transformed her warm brown eyes to a cold blue. "The catering company is legitimate," Terrence explained, handing her a staff ID. "They have no idea they're being used as cover for baby trafficking. Just blend in with the other servers." David grabbed her arm. "Nia, please, let me do this instead." She touched his face gently. "They know your face too well now. Besides," her voice hardened, "a mother knows her child. If our baby is in there, I'll know." The drive to Evergreen Wellness Center took them through back roads and industrial areas, avoiding the SUVs they knew were watching. The facility itself was beautiful, all glass and modern architecture nestled among manicured gardens. "Remember," Terrence said through the tiny earpiece he'd given her, "if you spot anything suspicious, just observe. Don't try to intervene." "We need proof before we can move." Nia nodded, though her every instinct screamed at her to tear the place apart until she found her child. She joined the stream of catering staff entering through a service entrance, keeping her head down and mimicking their movements. The event was set up in a large atrium, sunlight streaming through glass walls onto elegant tables and wealthy couples in expensive clothes. Everything looked perfectly normal, perfectly legitimate. Then she saw them. The babies. They were being brought out one at a time by nurses in pristine uniforms, each infant carefully swaddled and presented to potential parents like merchandise, at an exclusive boutique. Nia's hands shook as she arranged appetizers on a silver tray. These children had been stolen, just like her baby. Each one represented a mother somewhere, grieving a loss that wasn't real. She moved through the crowd, scanning each infant, looking for the distinctive birthmark she knew would be on her child's shoulder. Most of the babies were kept in a separate room, brought out only when requested by interested parties. 6 more infants in the viewing room, she whispered, pretending to adjust her earpiece. I need to get back there. Be careful, David's voice crackled in her ear. Security's watching that door closely. Nia waited until she saw another server enter the room, then quickly followed with her tray of empty glasses. Inside, the temperature was carefully controlled. Soft music playing as nurses tended to clear bassinets arranged in a semicircle. And there, in the third bassinet from the left, she saw it. A tiny shoulder with a heart-shaped birthmark. Her baby. Alive. Real. The world seemed to stop as she stared at her child, all her doubts and fears dissolving in an instant of pure certainty. She wanted to grab her baby and run, to hold the infant she'd been denied for so long. But before she could move, a familiar voice froze her in place. The senator's wife will be here soon to finalize the paperwork, Nurse Holloway said, entering the room. Everything must be perfect. Nia turned away quickly, gathering empty glasses with trembling hands. She had to get out, had to tell David and Terrence what she'd found. She was almost to the door when she heard Holloway again, closer this time. Wait. Nia's heart stopped. I know you from somewhere, Holloway said slowly. I work a lot of these events, Nia replied, keeping her voice soft and deferential, her eyes down. No. Holloway stepped closer. Those cheekbones, even with the contacts. A glass slipped from Nia's tray, shattering on the floor. In the moment of chaos that followed, she bolted. Stop her! Holloway's voice rang out behind her. Security! Nia ran through the atrium, pushing past startled guests. She heard shouts and running feet behind her, but she didn't stop, didn't look back. They made me! She gasped into her earpiece. East exit! Now! She burst through the service entrance just as David pulled up in their car. Bullets pinged off the metal as she dove into the back seat. Go! She screamed, and David floored it. They lost their pursuers in a maze of warehouse districts, finally pulling into an abandoned garage where Terrence waited. Did you find anything? He demanded. Yes. Nia was already pulling off the catering. Uniform. Our baby is there. I saw the birthmark, and I heard them talking. They're finalizing the adoption today, not tomorrow like we thought. The senator's wife is coming to collect. She trailed off, remembering something else she'd seen. The adoption paperwork. I grabbed a copy when I ran. She pulled a folded document from her pocket, smoothing it on the hood of the car. Their eyes widened as they read. These signatures, David said slowly. They forged our consent, made it look like we willingly gave up our baby. Not just that. Terrence pointed to a list of names. Look, all the hospital staff involved, the administrators, the judges who approved the adoptions. This is everybody. And now they know we have it, Nia realized. They'll move fast. As if to confirm her words, Terrence's phone buzzed with an alert. They're evacuating the facility, moving all the babies to a secondary location. The senator's estate, David guessed. They're accelerating the timeline. Nia studied the adoption document again. These names, some of them I recognize from the hospital, but others, politicians, judges, business leaders, Terrence explained, grimly. This goes higher than we thought. These people, they're not just helping traffic babies, they're clients. So that's why no one investigates, David said. The very people who should be stopping this are profiting from it. Nia's phone lit up with a text from an unknown number. Last chance. Walk away now. Next time we won't be so gentle. She showed it to the others. They still think they can scare us off. Because they don't understand what they're dealing with, David said, pulling her close. They've never faced a mother fighting for her child. Terrence was already plotting on his laptop. The senator's estate is like a fortress. Guards, cameras, motion sensors. Getting in won't be easy. Then we don't get in, Nia said. We make them come to us. The men looked at her questioningly. Think about it. What's the one thing these people care about more than getting babies to sell? Protecting their reputations. Understanding dawned on Terrence's face. We threaten to expose them. Not threaten, Nia corrected. We actually do it. Release everything we have. The financial records, the forged documents, the names. Put it all online. Send it to every news outlet. They'll try to discredit us, David warned. Let them try. While they're busy doing damage control, we use the chaos to get into the estate. Terrence nodded slowly. It could work. They'll have to deploy resources to contain the media fallout. Might pull security from the estate to protect other locations. But the moment we release the evidence, we'll have targets on our backs, David said. We already do, Nia reminded him. At least this way, if something happens to us, the truth gets out. They spent the next hour preparing the evidence for release. Terrence set up secure servers to distribute the information, while David called in every favor he had from his security work days, gathering intel on the senator's estate. Nia studied floor plans and aerial photos, memorizing every possible entry and exit. The estate sprawled across 10 acres with the main house set back from the road behind layers of security. The nursery will be here. David pointed to a wing of the house. Recently renovated, extra power consumption, separate climate control. Guards? Nia asked. At least 12 on rotation, plus whatever extra security they bring in for the baby's arrival. Terrence looked up from his computer. Everything's ready. One button, and all our evidence goes live. Nia took a deep breath, her hand hovering over the keyboard. This was it, the point of no return. Once they released the evidence, there would be no going back. A crash of breaking glass made them all jump. A canister rolled across the floor, spewing gas. Out! David yelled, grabbing Nia's arm. Now! They ran for the back exit, as armed men, in tactical gear, burst through windows and doors. Bullets sprayed across the room as they dove for cover. The evidence! Nia screamed. Release it! Terrence slammed his hand down on the enter key just before a bullet caught him in the shoulder. He stumbled but kept running. They made it to the car, peeling out of the garage as bullets pinged off the metal. In the rearview mirror, Nia saw more black SUVs joining the pursuit. They're hurting us, David realized, swerving to avoid a roadblock, trying to force us onto their route. Nia's phone exploded with notifications as their evidence hit the internet. News alerts, social media explosions, text messages from unknown numbers threatening everything from death to lawsuits. It's working, she said, watching the chaos unfold online. They're scrambling to contain it. A bullet shattered their back window, making them all duck. David turned down an alley, scraping paint off both sides of the car. We need to split up, Terrence gasped, holding his bleeding shoulder. Too easy to track us together. The hospital, Nia said suddenly. David, take Terrence there. What? No, I'm not leaving you. Listen to me. They'll have people watching hospitals expecting us to go to a private clinic. Take him to Westbridge, the last place they'll look. Find Dr. Reynolds. She'll help. David wanted to argue, but one look at Terrence's pale face made him nod. They pulled over long enough for Nia to jump out, then sped away, half the pursuit cars following them. Nia ran through back streets and service alleys, remembering the route they'd planned to the senator's estate. The remaining SUVs searched for her, but she kept to the shadows, using the city's service tunnels and maintenance passages. Her phone buzzed with a message from an encrypted number. CNN picking up the story. Senator called emergency press conference. Good. Let them scramble to explain away the evidence. Let them waste resources trying to contain a story that was already beyond their control. Because while they were busy dealing with the media firestorm, She would be slipping into their fortress. And this time, she wouldn't leave without her baby. The sun was setting as Nia approached the senator's estate, stopping in the shelter of a drainage tunnel to catch her breath. Ahead of her, the mansions. Lights were coming on, illuminating manicured lawns and patrol routes. Somewhere in that house her baby waited, and no amount of security, no army of guards, would stop her from reaching her child. The clock was ticking. The last rays of sunlight faded as Nia crouched in the shadows near the senator's estate, watching guards patrol the perimeter. Her phone vibrated silently, a message from David. At hospital with Terrence, Dr. Reynolds helping. Be careful. She turned the phone off. No distractions now. The estate loomed before her, its manicured lawns crossed with security beams and motion sensors. Getting in would be nearly impossible, but she didn't have to get in. Not yet. Their evidence release had worked better than expected. News vans clustered at the estate's main gate, reporters shouting questions at the stone-faced guards. Through the bars, Nia could see people rushing in and out of the mansion, lights blazing in every window. Her earpiece crackled. Movement at the east gate, a woman's voice said. 2 black SUVs approaching. Nia touched the earpiece. Copy that, Sarah. Dr. Reynolds' cousin worked private security, and she'd agreed to help monitor the estate's communications. Another ally in their growing network of supporters. The SUVs rolled through the gates, their tinted windows hiding their occupants. But Nia didn't need to see inside to know who they carried. The senator's security team, coming to clean up his mess. Hold position, Sarah's voice warned. More vehicles coming. 4 more SUVs appeared, moving in formation. As they passed through the gates, Nia caught a glimpse of James Sullivan in one of them, his face tight with anger. They're all here, she whispered. The whole operation. Wait, Sarah said sharply. Something's wrong. These vehicles, their heat signatures don't match the occupant numbers they reported at the gate. Before Nia could process this warning, the night exploded into chaos. Armed men erupted from the SUVs, their weapons trained, not on the reporters or the estate, but on Sullivan's car. Federal agents, a voice boomed through a megaphone. Everyone stay where you are. Gunfire shattered the evening calm. Sullivan's men returned fire, using their vehicles as cover. The reporters scattered, screaming, as bullets flew in all directions. Nia pressed herself against a tree, heart pounding. This wasn't part of the plan. Who had called the FBI? Her answer came in the form of another message, this one from Terrence. Sorry, had to make a call. Old friend at the bureau owed me. Use the chaos. She smiled grimly. Trust Terrence to have one last card up his sleeve. The firefight at the gate had drawn most of the estate's security. Through her binoculars, Nia could see guards rushing to respond, leaving other areas exposed. Sarah, she whispered. I need a gap in the perimeter, south side. Working on it, Sarah replied. Stand by. There. Service entrance. 2 guards. But they're distracted by the commotion. Nia moved like a shadow through the landscaping, years of dance training making her steps silent. The guards at the service entrance stood with their backs to her, weapons ready but attention fixed on the gunfight at the main gate. She was nearly at the door when a voice behind her said, That's far enough, Mrs. Carter. Nia turned slowly. Nurse Holloway stood there, a pistol aimed steadily at her chest. You just couldn't let it go, Holloway said, her voice filled with contempt. You had to keep pushing, had to ruin everything we built. Everything you built? Nia's voice shook, with rage. You mean the system you created to steal babies from their mothers? To destroy families for profit? Profit? Holloway laughed harshly. You think this is about money? This is about putting unwanted children with parents who deserve them. Parents, with the means, the connections to give them proper lives. Unwanted? Nia took a step forward, even as the gun tracked her movement. My baby was wanted, loved. You had no right. Rights. Holloway's face twisted. What right do people like you have to raise children in poverty, in broken homes? We're giving these babies a chance at real futures. A future built on lies? Nia's hands clenched. On the pain of mothers who will never know what happened to their children, sacrifices must be made for the greater good. Holloway's finger tightened on the trigger. And now, I'm afraid, you'll have to be one of them. A shot rang out, but it wasn't from Holloway's gun. The nurse's eyes widened in surprise as she looked down at the spreading red stain on her chest. Behind her stood David, his service weapon still raised. "Nobody touches my wife," he said quietly. Holloway crumpled to the ground as Nia ran to David, embracing him fiercely. "Terrence?" she asked. "Safe with Dr. Reynolds. The FBI raid was his idea, called in a favor from an agent who's been building. A case against Sullivan for months. Gunfire still echoed from the front of the estate." David grabbed Nia's hand. "Come on." While they're distracted, a new sound cut through the chaos, a baby's cry. Nia's head snapped up, every maternal instinct recognizing that voice. "The nursery," she breathed. "West Wing." They moved through the service entrance, David leading with his weapon ready. The house was a maze of marble floors and expensive artwork, but Nia followed the sound of her child's cries unerringly. They encountered 2 guards, but the men were more focused on the FBI raid outside. David dealt with them quickly, efficiently, using his security training to neutralize without killing. The nursery door was locked, but David made short work of it. Inside, they found a scene straight from a luxury magazine: pale blue walls, custom furniture, a hand-painted mural of clouds and stars, and there, in an ornate crib, was their baby. Nia rushed forward, tears streaming down her face as she lifted her child. The birthmark on the tiny shoulder confirmed what her heart already knew. This was her baby, alive and perfect. Well, isn't this touching? They spun to find Senator Michael Anderson standing in the doorway, a hunting rifle trained on them. His wife clutched his arm, her face streaked with tears. "Please," Mrs. Anderson begged, "please don't take our baby." "Your baby?" Nia's voice rose. "This is my child. Mine. You stole?" "We gave that child a chance," the senator roared. "A life of privilege, of opportunity. What could you offer? A broken home? A life of struggle?" "Love," Nia answered simply, holding her baby close. "Truth. The chance to grow up knowing who they really are." "Pretty words," Anderson sneered. "But they won't matter much when they find your bodies." Another tragic murder-suicide. The unstable mother who couldn't accept her loss, who killed her husband before turning the gun on herself. "That won't work this time," David said calmly. "The FBI has your whole operation. Sullivan's probably already cutting a deal." "The FBI?" Anderson laughed. "You think I can't handle the FBI? One phone call to Washington won't help," a new voice interrupted. Agent Thomas Parker stood in the hallway, weapon drawn. "Because we're not just the FBI, we're parents. Parents who've watched children disappear from hospitals across the country. Parents who finally have proof of what you've been doing." More agents filed in behind him. The senator's face went slack as he realized the magnitude of his exposure. "Michael," his wife pleaded, "do something." The senator raised his rifle, desperation in his eyes. Multiple shots rang out. When the echo faded, Senator Anderson lay dead, his wife screaming as agents secured her. The rifle lay unfired at his feet. "Mrs. Carter," Agent Parker approached carefully. "We'll need to document everything, get statements. But first, let's have a doctor check on your baby." The next hours passed in a blur of medical examinations, police statements, and tearful reunions. David never left Nia's side as they sat in a FBI medical van, their baby finally in their arms where it belonged. News helicopters circled overhead as more arrests were made. Sullivan, caught trying to flee. Hospital administrators, corrupt officials, the whole network crumbling under the weight of exposed truth. "There will be more," Agent Parker told them. "This operation wasn't limited to one hospital, one city. But thanks to your evidence, we can finally bring it all down." Terrence appeared, his shoulder bandaged but his eyes bright with triumph. "The story's breaking worldwide. No one can bury this now." Dr. Reynolds arrived to check on the baby, tears in her eyes as she watched Nia with her child. "Perfect health," she confirmed. They took good care of the merchandise at least. "Don't call my baby that," Nia said sharply. "I'm sorry." Dr. Reynolds looked ashamed. I can't believe they did this to so many families, that they thought they had the right." David touched Nia's shoulder. "It's over now. We can go. Home." But Nia shook her head. "Not yet. There's something I need to do first." She walked to where Mrs. Anderson sat in a police car, her face blank with shock. "I want you to know something," Nia said through the open window. "I understand wanting a child so badly it hurts. But what you did, stealing babies from mothers who loved them, who wanted them, that wasn't love. That was selfishness." Mrs. Anderson finally met her eyes. "We just wanted a family," she whispered. "So did we," Nia replied. "The difference is, we were willing to make one honestly." She turned away, back to her real family. David wrapped his arms around her and their baby as reporters shouted questions and cameras flashed. "Let's go home," she said softly. But as they walked to the waiting FBI vehicle, Nia noticed something odd. The agent holding the car door wasn't he one of the guards from Evergreen Wellness Center? She opened her mouth to warn David, but it was too late. The agent moved with shocking speed, a syringe plunging into David's neck. Nia tried to run, but more false agents appeared, surrounding them. Her baby was torn from her arms as David crumpled to the ground. "Did you really think it would be that easy?" Nurse Holloway's voice came from behind her. The nurse stood there, very much alive, the bullet wound nothing but theatrical blood on her shirt. The FBI raid, Nia realized, her vision growing dark as another needle found her arm. "It was all a performance," Holloway confirmed. "Meant to draw you out, to find the real evidence you had. And now that we have..." The world faded to black as Nia fell, her baby's cries echoing in her ears once again. Consciousness returned. Slowly, fragments of memory cutting through the fog like shards of broken glass. Nia's head pounded as she forced her eyes open, finding herself in what looked like a high-end hospital room. But something was wrong. There were no windows, and the air had a stale underground quality. "Welcome back, Mrs. Carter." Nurse Holloway sat in a chair beside the bed, her pristine uniform a mockery of medical care. The bullet wound that should have killed her was nowhere to be seen. "Where is my baby?" Nia's voice was hoarse, her throat raw. "Where's David?" "Your husband is safe, for now." Holloway checked something on a tablet. "As for the baby, well, that depends on your cooperation." Nia tried to sit up, but restraints held her wrists and ankles. "The FBI raid, it was all fake?" "Not all of it." Holloway smiled coldly. "The reporters were real. We needed legitimate media coverage. And some of the agents were actually FBI, just not the ones you met. We have people everywhere, Mrs. Carter. The sooner you understand that, the better." The door opened, and James Sullivan walked in looking irritated. "Is she lucid enough to understand her situation?" "Perfectly lucid," Holloway replied, though still showing signs of maternal obstinacy. Sullivan pulled up a chair, his expensive suit out of place in the sterile room. "Mrs. Carter, let me be clear. Your little crusade has caused us significant inconvenience. The evidence you released to the media was troublesome." "Good," Nia spat. "However," he continued as if she hadn't spoken, "we've contained most of it. Our media contacts are already spinning the story. A tragic case of postpartum psychosis, a grieving mother's conspiracy theories. The senator's death will be attributed to your husband, who, overwhelmed by your deteriorating mental state, took his own life." Nia's blood ran cold. "David's alive. You just said..." "For now, Sullivan. Cut her off. His continued survival depends entirely on you. We need you to make a statement. A confession, admitting that you invented the whole conspiracy in your grief, that you manipulated that journalist, what was his name, Terrence, into helping. Spread your delusions, and if I refuse," Sullivan's smile never reached his eyes, "then we'll have no choice but to make the official story true. Your husband's death will be quite real, and quite painful. As for your baby, well, there are always wealthy clients looking to adopt. Nia's hands clenched beneath the restraints. You won't get away with this. People know the truth now, do they? Holloway asked softly. Look. She held up a tablet showing news headlines. Senator's death linked to disturbed mother's delusions. Grief-stricken woman's conspiracy theory leads to tragedy. Hospital cleared of wrongdoing in infant death case. World believes what we tell them to believe, Sullivan said. Your evidence, discredited. Your witnesses, discredited. Even now, our contacts in law enforcement are building a case against you for the senator's murder. A new voice joined the conversation. I wouldn't be so sure about that. They all turned to see Terrence in the doorway, his injured shoulder now perfectly fine. He held a phone up, recording. What? Sullivan started to rise. Fascinating conversation, Terrence said, especially the part about your media contacts and law enforcement conspirators. The real FBI will be very interested. Holloway lunged for a panic button, but the room suddenly filled with genuine federal agents, weapons drawn. James Sullivan, a senior agent announced. You're under arrest for kidnapping, conspiracy, fraud, and about 24 other charges we're still cataloging. As Sullivan and Holloway were handcuffed, Terrence approached Nia's bed, quickly releasing her restraints. How? She asked as he helped her sit up. Did you really think I'd trust an old friend at the FBI without verifying first? He grinned. When the raid turned out to be fake, we knew they'd try something like this, so we let them think they'd won, while the real FBI built their case. David, the baby, safe. The FBI secured them first before moving in here. This whole facility is being raided as we speak. Nia's legs were unsteady as she stood, but determination drove her forward. They emerged from the underground medical wing into chaos. FBI agents swarmed everywhere, arresting staff and seizing documents. Computer experts downloaded servers while evidence teams cataloged rooms full of forged birth certificates and adoption papers. Mom! The cry came from down the hall. David ran toward her, their baby cradled safely in his arms. Nia collapsed into them, tears flowing freely as she held her family. I'm sorry, David whispered. They grabbed me first, tried to make me believe. You were the one behind everything. But I knew you'd never give up. A familiar face appeared. The real Agent Parker, badge prominently displayed. Mrs. Carter, your evidence and testimony were invaluable. Combined with what we gathered, today, this goes deeper than anyone imagined. He showed them into a makeshift command center where screens displayed an organizational chart of the conspiracy. Names and connections sprawled across multiple displays: judges, politicians, hospital administrators, adoption agencies. We've identified at least 30 hospitals involved nationwide, Parker explained. Hundreds of babies stolen and sold to wealthy families. The money trail leads to offshore accounts, shell companies, even foreign adoption rings. The senator? Nia asked. A mid-level player, it turns out. The real power was higher up. Supreme Court justices, governors, even federal officials. People who could bury investigations and discredit witnesses. Terrence studied the charts. That's why they were so confident. They thought they were untouchable. Not anymore, Parker said grimly. We're moving on all of them simultaneously. Right. Now FBI teams are executing search warrants across the country. No one's escaping this net. A young agent burst in. Sir, you need to see this. We found their records room. They followed him to a vast underground chamber. Floor-to-ceiling filing cabinets stretched into the shadows, each drawer labeled with a year and hospital name. My God, David breathed. How long has this been going on? Decades, the agent replied. We're finding cases dating back to the 1980s. But here's the really important part. They kept DNA samples. From every baby, every birth mother. They used them to match infant features with adoptive parents' preferences. Nia felt sick. They treated babies like designer handbags. But now we can use those samples to find them, Terrence realized. To reunite families. Parker nodded. It will take time, but we'll find them all. Every stolen child, every grieving mother. They'll finally know the truth. As if to emphasize his words, they heard commotion from above. More agents leading out handcuffed suspects, including hospital staff they recognized from Westbridge. "Dr. Williams," Nia said coldly, as the fraudulent doctor was led past. He couldn't meet her eyes. "We thought we were doing the right thing," he muttered. "Giving them better lives." "Better?" Nia's voice shook with rage. "You took them from mothers who loved them, who wanted them. You destroyed families for profit. There's no justification for that." More arrests followed throughout the day. Hospital administrators, social workers, corrupt officials. Each new face revealed another layer of the conspiracy. But the most shocking revelation came when they found Nurse Holloway's private office. Hidden behind a false wall, they discovered photos, hundreds of them. Holloway with powerful figures, all involved in the trafficking ring, and behind her desk, a family tree. She was one of them, Terrence said, studying the documents. One of the stolen babies, adopted by the original architects of the conspiracy, raised to continue their work. That's why she believed in it so strongly, David realized. She thought she was saving them, giving them the same opportunity she had. Nia shook her head. She was as much a victim as the babies she stole. But that doesn't excuse what she did. As evening fell, they gathered in an FBI briefing room. Parker updated them on the operation's progress. "Sullivan's talking," he reported. "Naming names, providing account numbers. The whole network is unraveling, but—" He hesitated. "But what?" Nia asked. "Some of the conspirators are still out there. High-level players who got warning before we moved in. They have resources, connections. They'll try to rebuild." "Let them try," David said firmly. "We'll be ready." Terrence's phone buzzed with news. Alerts. The story was breaking worldwide now, impossible to contain. Headlines screamed about the scandal, the arrests, the scope of the trafficking ring. But victory felt hollow as they watched videos of other mothers learning the truth about their stolen babies. Some children were grown now, raised by families, who might never know their true origins. The damage could never be fully undone. "We should go home," David said softly, seeing Nia's exhaustion. "It's been a long day." But as they prepared to leave, Parker pulled them aside. "You need to understand something. These people, they don't give up easily. They've already lost millions in adoption fees. Their clients, their reputation, everything they built is burning. They'll want revenge." "Are you saying we're not safe?" David asked. "I'm saying you need protection. We're arranging a safe house, new identities if necessary." Nia looked down at her baby, finally safe in her arms. "No. No more hiding. No more running. Let them come. Mrs. Carter." "He's right, Nia," Terrence interjected. "These people are desperate now. That makes them dangerous." She stood her ground. "They tried to take my baby, tried to destroy my family. I won't let them force us into hiding. We'll face whatever comes, but we'll do it on our terms." Later that night, in the heavily guarded hotel room the FBI had arranged, Nia watched her baby sleep. David dozed in a chair nearby while Terrence worked on his laptop, documenting everything for the story that would shock the world. Her phone lit up with a message from an encrypted number. "You've started a war you can't win. Everyone has a weakness. We'll find yours." She showed it to Terrence, who immediately began tracing it. "Blocked," he reported. "But it proves Parker was right. They're not done." "Neither are we," Nia said firmly. A noise outside made them all tense. But it was just agents changing shifts, their presence a reminder of both the danger and their protection. As if sensing her anxiety, the baby stirred. Nia lifted her child, holding them close, breathing in that perfect newborn scent. "I've, got you," she whispered, "and I'm never letting go again." Through the hotel window, she could see news vans still camped outside, their lights illuminating the darkness. Tomorrow, they would have to face them, tell their story, help other families find their stolen children. But for now, in this moment, she had everything she needed, her baby in her arms, her husband beside her. The truth finally exposed. A car alarm went off in the parking lot. In the distance, A helicopter's searchlight swept across the city. Somewhere out there, the remains of the conspiracy plotted their revenge. The war wasn't over, but Nia Carter was ready for battle. 3 weeks after the raid, Nia stood before a bank of microphones in the federal courthouse. Camera flashes erupted as she gripped the podium, her voice steady despite her racing heart. My name is Nia Carter, and I'm here to tell you the truth about a criminal enterprise that has stolen thousands of babies from their mothers. Not just at Westbridge Memorial, but at hospitals across the country. David stood behind her, their baby safely in his arms, while Terrence watched from the side, his recorder capturing everything. Agent Parker and his team provided security, their eyes constantly scanning the crowd. These people didn't just steal our children, Nia continued. They stole our truth. They used their power and influence to make grieving mothers doubt their own minds, their own hearts. But today, that ends. She held up a thick folder of documents. This contains evidence of over 3,000 cases of infant trafficking, spanning 4 decades. Names, dates, DNA records, proof that can't be buried or denied. And we're releasing all of it right now. The room erupted into chaos as reporters shouted questions. But Nia wasn't finished. To every mother who heard her baby cry before being told it died, you weren't crazy. You weren't imagining things. Your baby is alive and we're going to find them. Her words triggered a wave of new revelations. Mothers across the country began coming forward, sharing stories that matched the pattern. Hospital staff burdened by years of guilt started talking. The conspiracy's careful walls of silence crumbled under the weight of exposed truth. But victory came with a price. That evening, as they left the courthouse under heavy FBI protection, shots rang out. A sniper's bullet shattered the window of their SUV, missing Nia's head by inches. Get down! David shielded them with his body as agents returned fire. Their driver executed a perfect defensive maneuver, speeding them to safety while backup teams pursued the shooter. They're getting desperate, Terrence said later at the safe house, watching agents sweep the perimeter. The evidence release hit them hard. Their wealthy clients are turning on them, demanding answers. Nia rocked her baby, who had somehow slept through the entire incident. How many got away from the original organization? Too many, Agent Parker admitted, joining them. We got most of the hospital staff, the mid-level operators. But some of the key players, the ones with real money and power, they slipped away. Like who? Marcus Walsh, for one. Amanda Walsh's husband. He was the financial architect behind the whole operation. Disappeared with millions in trafficking profits. David's hand tightened on his weapon. After the shooting, he'd resumed carrying it constantly. What about the clients? The ones who knowingly bought stolen babies? Some are cooperating, claiming they didn't know the truth. Others are using their wealth and connections to fight extradition, tie up the courts with appeals. And the children? Nia asked the question that haunted them all. Parker's face softened. DNA testing has begun. It's complicated. Many of these kids are grown now, with families of their own. Some don't want to know the truth, others. He was interrupted by his phone buzzing. His expression darkened as he read the message. What is it? Terrence asked. Another one. Third this week. Someone's killing our witnesses. The news hit them hard. First the nurse who had tried to help them, then others who had agreed to testify. Each death staged to look like suicide or accident. We need to move you, Parker decided. They're cleaning house, eliminating everyone who can expose them. But Nia stood her ground. No, I won't hide. That's what they want. To silence us, make us disappear like all their other victims. Nia, David started to argue. Listen to me, she cut him off. Every time we run, every time we hide, they win. They keep their power through fear, through isolation. But what if we did the opposite? What if we went bigger? Terrence leaned forward. What are you thinking? A national database, public, accessible. Every case, every DNA record, every connection we've uncovered. Make it impossible to hide the truth. They'll try to shut it down, Parker warned. Let them try. We'll mirror it across servers worldwide. Get international media involved. Make it too big to bury. The idea caught fire. Over the next days, they worked with tech experts to build the database. Terrence's media contacts spread the word. Families began submitting DNA samples, hoping to find their stolen children. The conspiracy fought back hard. Denial of service attacks hit their servers. Legal threats poured in. More witnesses died in suspicious accidents. Then came the morning Nia found her baby's crib empty. The note left behind was simple. Time to end this. For one horrifying moment, her world stopped. Then training and instinct took over. She triggered the FBI's emergency protocols while David reviewed security footage. The kidnapper had been good, but not good enough. A single frame caught their face. Amanda Walsh, Nia breathed, staring at the image. She's working with her husband. The FBI launched a massive manhunt, but Nia knew they were missing the point. This wasn't about running away. This was a challenge. Her phone confirmed it. Coordinates sent from an encrypted number along with a message. Come alone, or the baby dies. Tell anyone the baby dies. You started this, time to finish it. David saw the message over her shoulder. It's a trap. Of course it is. Nia was already moving, checking her gun, a gift from Parker after the sniper incident. But it's also our chance to end this. I'm coming with you. No. She touched his face gently. They'll be watching. One wrong move and we lose everything. I need you to create a distraction. Keep the FBI busy while I handle this. Nia, trust me, a mother knows what to do. The coordinates led to an abandoned church outside the city. Once grand, now decaying, its stained glass windows watched like hollow eyes as Nia approached. Amanda Walsh stood at the altar, holding Nia's baby. Marcus Walsh lounged in a pew nearby, his expensive suit incongruous, in the dusty sanctuary. Quite a performance these past weeks, Marcus said, applauding mockingly. The press conference, the database, the international attention, you've cost us billions. Where's Nurse Holloway? Nia asked, noting the woman's absence. Dead. Amanda's voice was cold. She outlived her usefulness, started having regrets. Like you should be having. You're a mother too, Amanda. How can you be part of stealing babies from their mothers? Part of it? Amanda laughed. I created it. This was my vision. Holloway, Sullivan. They were just tools. I saw the potential in matching unwanted children with deserving families. The profit was just a bonus. Unwanted? Nia took a step forward, stopping when Amanda tightened her grip on the baby. We wanted our children. We loved them. You had no rights, Marcus cut in. Rights are for people with power. You want to talk about rights? Let's talk about the right of wealthy families to have children. The right of babies to grow up with every advantage. The right of a mother to raise her own child, Nia countered. The right of families to stay together. Noble sentiments, Amanda sneered. But this ends today. You're going to make a new statement. Admit you made everything up. That your grief drove you to paranoid delusions. The evidence was faked. The database compromised. And if I refuse? Amanda held the baby over the altar rail. The drop to the stone floor below was significant. You won't refuse, Marcus said confidently. No mother would take that risk. Nia's hand moved slowly toward her gun. You're right, no mother would. Everything happened at once. The gun cleared its holster as Amanda started to release her grip, but Nia wasn't aiming at them. The shot hit the ancient rope holding the chandelier, sending it crashing down between them. In the chaos, Nia launched herself forward, catching her baby as Amanda stumbled back. More shots rang out, Marcus firing wildly in the dust and confusion. But he hadn't counted on the FBI team hidden outside, brought in during the night by the one person Nia had trusted with her plan. Terrence burst through a side door, his camera recording everything as agents swarmed in. The Walshes never had a chance. You knew we were watching, Amanda said as handcuffs clicked around her wrists. How? A mother always knows, Nia replied, holding her baby close. I just had to give you enough rope to hang yourselves. The evidence they found in the Walshes. Possession was damning. Offshore accounts, blackmail material, lists of wealthy clients still waiting for adoptions. The last pieces of the conspiracy laid bare. Hours later, as the sun set behind the old church, Nia sat with David and their baby, watching the FBI process the scene. "It's really over," David said wonderingly. "This part is." Nia looked down at their child. "But there are still families out there, still truth to be uncovered." Terrence joined them, his camera finally powered down. "The database is exploding. DNA matches coming in from around the world, families finding each other after decades." Agent Parker approached with news from the interrogations. "The Walshes are talking, trying to cut deals, but it won't help them. We have everything, names, dates, every baby they ever stole." "And the families?" Nia asked. "The ones who knowingly bought stolen babies? They'll face justice too. It won't be easy. Lot of wealth, lot of power trying to keep this quiet. But the truth's too big to hide now." He handed her a file. "Speaking of truth, remember that nurse who helped you? The one who died? She left this for you." Inside was a letter and a USB drive. The letter was simple. "For the mothers, all of them. Let them know they weren't crazy. Let them know their babies lived." Nia held, her baby tighter as tears fell. "We'll tell them. We'll tell everyone." In the weeks that followed, their database became a beacon of hope. DNA matches brought families together. Adult children learned their true histories. The wealthy clients who had bought stolen babies faced criminal charges. But healing would take time. Some reunions were joyful, others painful. Many adopted children struggled with their new reality. Birth mothers faced difficult choices about revealing long-buried truths. Through it all, Nia and David kept fighting. They established a foundation to help reunite families, to provide counseling and support. Terrence's documentary exposed the trafficking rings methods, helping other hospitals identify and prevent similar schemes. One evening, as they watched their baby sleep safely in the nursery they had once feared would remain empty, Nia's phone buzzed with a news alert. "Another hospital," she told David. "Florida this time, same pattern." He squeezed her hand. "Different players? Same game?" Maybe. She was already reaching for her laptop. Or maybe part of the old network, trying to start over. "You want to check it out?" It wasn't a question. He knew her too well. "Those mothers deserve to know the truth," she said. "Their babies deserve to be found." David nodded, already pulling up flight information. "When do we leave?" Nia looked at their sleeping child, then back at the article about missing babies. "In Florida. The war wasn't over. Perhaps it never would be, as long as people valued profit over families, power over truth. But she wasn't fighting alone anymore. She had David, Terrence, Agent Parker, and a growing network of allies. Most importantly, she had the truth and the unshakable strength of a mother's love. "Tomorrow," she decided. "We leave tomorrow." As she turned off the nursery light, she smiled. Let them try to hide their crimes in darkness. She would always be there, bringing truth into the light. Because that's what mothers do. They protect their children, all of them. What makes a mother? Is it the act of giving birth, or is it the fierce, unrelenting love that refuses to be silenced? In Nia's story, we learn that sometimes the strongest voice isn't the one speaking from positions of power. It's the one whispering, "I know. You're out there," into an empty nursery every night. If this story moved you, show your support with a like. Subscribe for more gripping tales of justice, love, and triumph against impossible odds. Turn on notifications, because every day we bring you stories that need to be told.